Cyberpunk 2077 is a game full of amazing and emotionally impactful side stories and character quests, whether that be finally opening up to Johnny Silverhand at the oil fields, watching Judy cry over Evelyn in the bathtub, or staring at Panam work on a car for moral support. And it's because of these exact quests that I always felt the game was so amazing, even from day one when most people lamented it for the bugs. However, despite all of the fascinating quests that focus solely on the side characters and their harrowing and tragic lives, the one that might have stuck with me the most was actually a story about a boy that you never even get to formally talk to, who has suffered one of the most horrifying and tragic things I've ever seen in a video game. Nicknamed The Hunt, this quest takes place shortly after you've gotten partway through the I Fought the Law questline, another personal favorite that tasks you with helping the Peralez family with an insane spying situation they're dealing with in their own home. And during that questline, you meet with a man named River Ward, who is a cop who's been hired by the Peralez family to assist them with an ongoing investigation. But if you befriend him during your detective work, he will call you again later in the game asking you for assistance, stressing you'll need to meet in person to discuss. When you arrive, he shows you a video from police scanners of Anthony Harris, the so-called Peter Pan serial killer finally being caught after having been pulled over in his car on the street for unrelated reasons. In the video, the serial killer Anthony tries to run away from the NCPD, but is shot mid-stride, forcing him onto the ground and into a comatose state. But for River, the even more haunting revelation from the video is a victim in the passenger seat that falls out mid-encounter. And this mysterious child just so happens to be wearing River's little nephew, Randy's shoes, a boy who recently went missing from his home that River has been doing everything he can to solve. And while the dead body in this serial killer's car certainly wasn't Randy based on his build, it strongly indicates that the poor little kid might have gotten caught up in something really heinous. So River begs you to help him on the case, and you both head over to the precinct for clues, where you discover that in his comatose state, Anthony Harris has not been dreaming, meaning you won't be able to use any brain dance technology to try and experience his thoughts. In order to try and jolt his memory back awake, you and River head back to the home of his nephew and his sister, and here you have to confront the boy's mother in her time of grieving and hear stories about Randy as he grew up, all while looking for clues all around the home that might give you a way to turn Anthony's brain back on once again. One of the most sinister things you can find here if you're able to hack into Randy's computer using your intelligence skill is tons of messages between Randy and Anthony, along with a Natalie on darknet and hidden sites, which show how Anthony was able to slowly groom and trick this helpless young child into thinking he was his friend, with many messages where Anthony acts sad and helpless and tries to confide in innocent Randy. Luckily though, if you manage to find enough evidence, you can return to the police precinct and jolt Anthony's brainwaves alive again, after which he begins to dream. So against standard protocol and with the help of another member on the force, you're able to view Anthony's dreams as a brain dance, where you are met with visions of his childhood. As a young boy, Anthony was mercilessly made fun of by students and teachers alike, and you get to experience firsthand the physical and mental torture he had to go through in and outside of the classroom. And it's here we also find out that as a young boy, Anthony started to act out by killing small animals and using chemicals he must have gotten from home. Following this, you find yourself in another dream, this time in Anthony's home as a child, where his abusive father mistreats him and the livestock alike, including a cow that he is injecting with serums to kill, all in a massive barn that is presumably Anthony's childhood home, and likely where he found his affinity to work with and kill animals. You watch as day in and day out, Anthony is subjected to abuse and aggression non-stop, while surrounded by animals being tortured against their wills. And as if it couldn't get any worse, we finally are transported into Anthony's last dream, this time from a much more recent period where we once again find Anthony in his childhood home and barn, but this time as an adult. Standing up from his chair to the backdrop of ominous sounds and squeals, we watch as Anthony steps out of his office and into the main bay of the barn, and off in the distance we can see something moving. As Anthony approaches, it becomes more and more clear that this something is a human being, a large man crawling and bleeding out against the floor, trying to escape and moaning for help. But instead of finding salvation, he is rather met by Anthony reaching over him and overpowering his drugged out soul. Before you can even fully contemplate all the horrors you've just seen, River will deduce with the clues he's seen from the brain dance, the location in the dreams is a nearby farm called Edgewood. So you run to your cars and speed over and find a massive plot of land filled to the brim with mines and automated turrets as defense. But regardless of whether you go in guns blazing or sneaking and hacking your way through everything, the most horrifying part of the entire quest rears its ugly head here. Inside the barn, you find multiple dead bodies, all attached to massive animal machines used to inject cows with copious amounts of drugs, and these prisoners are all tied up and restrained against their will, as these machines pump drugs into and pull the very souls out of their bodies. Frantically, River runs over in search of Randy, and lo and behold, if you've gotten enough evidence and finished things quickly, Randy will still be alive, albeit barely, along with some of the other prisoners as well. More than anything though, the reason that this is the most captivating quest in the entire game for me is because of how raw and intense it all is. It's really rare that the game's medium as a whole even tackles subject matter this dark and bleak, let alone by letting us quite literally dive into the minds of the most twisted individuals in our society. And being able to experience that firsthand while terrifying was also such an ensnaring experience, where it was hard to put the controller down at any moment because you simply had to know what was coming next and how it would all pan out. Because it's that exact kind of intensity that makes a quest in a game so memorable, and certainly is the type of story that will last with you even long after you've completed the game. Cyberpunk 2077 is a game that is absolutely filled to the brim with compelling and thought-provoking characters. Whether it be on side quests, main story missions, or small gigs, it's almost impossible to explore this world for any longer than an hour without stumbling upon some of the best and well-written NPCs of all time. So choosing just one for a video like this can be really difficult. And while originally I was deciding between Johnny Silverhand, who has such an amazing arc as a person and is someone who is constantly with us throughout the entire game, or Panam, Rogue, and Takamura for their steadfast outlooks on life that really make you think, the real most compelling character from this entire game is, in my opinion, Judy Alvarez. Because you see, Judy is a tragic character in every way imaginable. She has suffered her entire life through loss of friends and family, and in some ways has even been swept up into the downtrodden life of gangs and underground BD film surfing. And so when you first meet her, she's quite standoffish, reserved, and quick to have you leave. She doesn't trust anyone around her, that is, except for the only person she has left in her entire life, Evelyn Parker. However, as you progress through the trials of the main quest of the game, you eventually are taken down a path that includes Evelyn being kidnapped from the dollhouse she works in and being forcibly tortured in a secret underground dungeon. And so Judy reaches out to you looking for help as she knew you worked with Evelyn, and after hours of fighting and searching, when you finally stumble upon her in that forsaken room underground, completely devoid of thoughts and emotion, with blood streaming down her face and a camera ominously facing a torn apart bed in a sketchy room, it hits you how bad Judy must feel. She cries and screams out to Evelyn, only to look into her now soulless and devoured eyes that say more than any words ever could. So you help Judy bring Evelyn back to her apartment, where she thanks you for all that you've done and says that she'll help Evelyn get back on her feet while wishing you the best. But as if it couldn't get any worse, you soon receive a call from Judy, struggling to compose the very words she speaks, begging for you to rush over. And it's here you discover Evelyn dead in the bathtub, after taking her own life, with Judy beside her crying uncontrollably and struggling to stand amidst the weakness her own soul has suffered. A girl who has had nothing but pain throughout her life and lost everything she held dear, now lost all that she had left. And looking into her eyes and seeing that pain tells so much more of a story than almost any character out there could even attempt to. About someone who feels they let down the last person who loved them in a world that has forsaken them. The real triumph, though, comes from what happens later, as Judy composes herself, stays strong, lighting a cigarette on the balcony and looking for revenge. And whether or not you decide to turn Judy against that path or help her on it, you eventually will fully earn her trust and be asked to come to see her childhood home, which is now buried underwater. And it's here she talks about how she grew up as a child, the pain she's been through, and most importantly, how despite it all, she still carries on with hope. No matter what life throws at this woman, no matter what this damn city decides to make her suffer through next, there is a fire in her soul that lights one within V and yours alike as the player as well. Because you see, Judy doesn't come across as bombastic as Johnny, as ride or die as Panam, or as strong in conviction as Takamura. But what Judy does have is something that in a way is so much more impressive. An absolute resilience in the face of adversity to stand strong and remain hopeful no matter what, not just in her future, but in helping others around her that she cares about. And it's why seeing her at the end of the game take those steps to leave Night City and find a new home for herself is so powerful. It's a reflection of a character we don't often see in games, movies, or any form of entertainment for that matter. Usually the best characters are masculine and strong men or women, or feminine men that finally found their soft side and can open up. But it's seldom we see such strong female characters that also never had to shed their sense of femininity to get there. It's why I found Judy so much more interesting and gravitated towards her more than Panam on my first playthrough. She is a broken girl, someone who has been administered to the worst in life at every turn. And yet despite all of that, she refuses to give up, but even more compelling, refuses to stop believing and trusting in others too. She's a character that shows through the hardship. Becoming more hard yourself isn't always the answer. Sometimes through your love and willingness to rely on others and believe in them, you can keep that lovable essence inside too and still be strong. The type of character that defines what it means to be strong in the first place. And also one of the most compelling of all time. A woman that no matter the circumstance stands as a beacon of hope in a world that has none. Showing just how deep and emotional a journey with another human can get through all the highs and lows that you experience with her. One of the most fascinating and reflective video game characters out there. For those of you that don't know, Cyberpunk 2077 is my favorite game of all time, and a big part of that is the amazing and immersive world. But no game world like this can be so immersive without some awesome world building and lore. And that's because the story of Cyberpunk 2077 actually begins in the early 1800s, when the original dynasties and families that would eventually give rise to megacorporations hundreds of years later were born, including many notable giants like Arasaka. But 1989 was the actual year things really kicked into gear. Secretly, behind the backs of the United States government, the FBI, NSA, DEA, and CIA all banded together to form what they called the Gang of Four, and with their power and influence, started to run the US behind the backs of the president and legislative and executive branches. Now pulling the strings, the Gang of Four attacked South America in an all-out war due to their own interests. And because of all of the casualties and injuries, massive amounts of spending were put into cybernetics and drugs to help the veterans. Sadly though, this war along with many other conflicts around the world led to an all-out collapse of society. Colombian drug lords, pissed at the never-ending death, launched a small nuclear bomb at New York and killed thousands, which in conjunction with engagements across the world set the stock market into a complete freefall in 1994, wiping away a majority of humanity's wealth. In this now chaotic world in pure disarray, the biggest companies around the globe started to band together to help, which resulted in them only becoming more powerful and influential, the beginning of the mega corporations' rise to power. Natural disasters all over the world started to erupt around this time as well, with an earthquake putting a third of Los Angeles underwater and droughts in the Midwest leading to food shortages that starved millions. To top it all off too, in the early 2000s a deadly plague broke out which threatened a majority of Earth's population, and with everything going downhill fast, drastic action had to be taken. The mega corporations once again stepped up and created new technologies like the net to try and make communication easier, but this only meant more and more power for those evil corpos. And with all of this newfound power, the organizations also began to amass huge personal armies, which then cascaded into all-out corpo wars that led to even more devastation across the world. Gangs which had already formed in almost every major city became more and more powerful, and the Earth as we know it was on the verge of complete and utter annihilation. But as they always had, the corpos managed to gather even more influence by promising salvation. And essentially, this process of mega corporations becoming more powerful continued over and over through multiple wars and even space battles, and eventually resulted in the setting everything we've come to know from the game itself, where we play as V in Night City in California. And it's in the game we get to explore so many different awesome ideas like cyberpsychosis or cybernetic implants that cause people to go crazy, along with the evolution of the net and the black wall specifically, which serves as a protective barrier to the net to keep out rogue AI that might even be working with extraterrestrial beings that are helping them take over the universe. It's just such an insane backstory for the whole game, but along with that comes so many deep explanations and displays of how this future fantasy of humanity would live, with an over-reliance on technology and a loss of connection to our own bodies being key. Even places like brothels in this dystopian future are actually staffed by humans with chips in their head called dolls, who simply fulfill your every fantasy only for the chip in their brain to wipe their memory and for them to do it over and over again, like being trapped in a nightmare that you never even knew you experienced. It's a world with so many dark and twisted themes like this, but also at its core, one that didn't forget about all of the humanity we have beneath those layers of electronics and wires in our heads, where people still at their core have a fire and love in their soul to save the little bit of humanity we all have left. For those of you who have been watching my channel for a while now, you know that Cyberpunk 2077 is my favorite game of all time. And most of that comes down to the amazing characters and writing, fast-paced violent gameplay, and most of all, emotional moments that truly reach into your heart and soul and make you tear up or smile with joy. However, another thing about the Cyberpunk universe that makes it so interesting is all of the mysteries and unanswered questions that we still have. Things like who the strange Mr. Blue Eyes is, if Gary the Prophet was right about lizard-human-alien hybrids taking over the world, or whether or not Panam or Judy is the better waifu. But even with all these grand questions, there's one mystery in Cyberpunk that stands so far above the rest that it's not only one of the greatest mysteries in that game, but one of the best in gaming history, full stop. FF06B5. You see, shortly after the game's initial release and lambasted reception, some of the players that were enjoying the experience noticed a peculiar statue sitting in the center of Union Street in Corpo Plaza. Surrounded by a flock of monks chanting strange rituals and seemingly praying to it, the statue also sported a massive red sequence of letters and numbers, which simply read out FF:06:B5. On its own, this was for sure strange and seemed like a hint that the developers at CD Projekt Red were trying to alert us to something. But it was only after players discovered 6 other similar, smaller statues scattered all throughout the game world with the same exact code that things started to really heat up. A subreddit was made to track progress, but for a while, almost no definitive solutions were made, meaning tons and tons of theories would be hatched up daily, some more insane than others. One popular postulation was that the status code was actually the HTML hex code for the color shocking pink, which is a shade of magenta, which is why some people call this the Magenta Mystery as well. Others in the community assumed it might be a geomarker or waypoint of sorts beckoning players on where to go next, or maybe even a MAC address that would lead to an unknown dormant computer that held the answers to all of our questions. But none of these solutions bore any real fruit, and led to some even more crackpot theories like a group of cryptographers that tried to break a potential cipher in the code that could potentially point to the sequence being a reference to the Polish composer Frederick Chopin's Nocturne Op. 55 No. 1, which is what the final mission of the game's name is based on. Other insane ideas range from the sequence FF06 being a reference to Final Fantasy, to it actually being a code used by FBI agents into classified documents that were to signal first contact with alien intelligence meant to harm the government. After years and years of more research and little progress though, the only thing keeping the community going was a previous live stream from one of the developers at CD Projekt Red, Paweł Sasko, where he did confirm that the mystery was a real thing and that there was a true answer, but he couldn't spoil it. And by the way, Paweł is actually a super nice guy and extremely passionate about the game. He's commented on some of my Cyberpunk videos I made about why it was great even when everyone was saying it was bad, and I'm super glad he's playing a big part in the eventual sequel Orion we will hopefully see a couple years from now. Regardless though, a big break in the case was eventually finally made. Because you see, one of the crazier easier theories in the community at the time was that by converting the code's decimal values with an extra 2 zeros added at the end into a Unix timestamp, the date December 18th, 2022 must mean something important. And lo and behold, just a few days before that, on December 13th, The Witcher 3 finally got its highly anticipated next-gen update release. For most players, this meant better graphics, gameplay, and performance, but for fans of the FF06B5 mystery, things were about to get absolutely insane. Because post the update going out, some Witcher players discovered that there were actually small tidbits of new content added all over the map for players to enjoy, but by far the most bizarre of them was a destroyed bastion found in Velen, just southwest of the crossroads. Here you will find 3 small ruins, each with an out-of-place lever inside, and after pulling all 3, an earth elemental is summoned in the middle of them, which after you vanquish, will spawn a portal on a hill just nearby. If you travel through the portal, you will arrive at the top of the destroyed bastion itself, which previously was inaccessible, and if you make your way downward, you find a hole in the structure which, if you jump through, throws you into an underground lair full of unkillable wraiths that chase you down hunting for blood. The only way to actually escape this nightmare is to cast an Ard spell on 2 crystals in the room, which will then light up and create a portal from which you can leave like nothing happened. But the far more interesting thing is that if you stay in the room and explore a little bit while also not getting killed, you will find this strange symbol on the back wall. If we take a closer look, we can see a triangle with a golden crest and 3 circles on each edge, seemingly a reference to the Illuminati. And this all is surrounded by the depiction of Ouroboros, a snake that devours its own tail to represent the eternal cycle of destruction and rebirth in the universe, often used to heed the coming end of the world in a specific cycle. And within each of these circles and outside the Ouroboros itself are strange, unreadable symbols in a language we don't understand. But since we're in the Witcher universe, we can assume that these are all written in what is called Elder Writing, which is a play on the real-world Glagoltic language, the oldest ever recorded Slavic alphabet in history. So if we translate these symbols using the Glagoltic reference manuals and then translate that into Latin, we are left with this sequence of letters: FF, VQ, BZ, KW, GB, FP, OVE, YAR. And what does this sequence somewhat remind us of? FF06B5. In fact, while actually trying to break this cipher proves extremely hard, under certain circumstances, the top portion will in fact translate to FF06B5, and then even reference sex robots, because why not? So it seems clear that CD Projekt Red at the time was expanding this mystery across all of their games, which only gets even stranger considering that this symbol had actually existed in The Witcher even before the update but went unnoticed. And inside that center triangle is also the color magenta, which the sequence hex color code references, as I mentioned before. So obviously the mystery was starting to heat up, but it was actually only years after this point, and very recent as of making this video, that many huge breakthroughs in the entire case have been made, due to the Cyberpunk 2077 2.0 update, including a lot more in-game references and solves for the mystery. Post this update, if you travel to the Biotechnica protein farms outside of Night City, you can find this unassuming shack. And if you go inside, in the center of the room is a laptop below an inexplicable platform with cables strewn down connecting the laptop to a large server bed behind it. Reading some of the messages on this computer, we discover some in-game conspiracy theorists that are researching the same mystery we are, and they're all emailing one man at this shack named Polyhister. And they note that there have been multiple approaches that led nowhere, but that a new idea has appeared that could be promising. Making reference to a vintage game from long ago in the email chains, a discussion goes on about how the researchers at the time thought that the clue was a wall, when actually, the entire time it was a door. This seems like a very obvious suggestion from CD Projekt Red that the symbol we found on that underground wall in The Witcher 3, which would actually be considered a vintage game by the year 2077, was actually a door to something greater, not just a strange cipher on a wall. And this is where things finally get absolutely unbelievable. Cyberpunk players and investigators were able to find another nearby laptop abandoned in a landfill, and inside were contents that seemed to have cipher table translations for some of the Witcher Ouroboros Illuminati wall pictures. And on top of this, inside Polyhister's shack in the Biotechnica flats, there was also an arcade machine hidden in the corner, which if activated was an entirely new minigame that closely resembled Doom. When playing, you can try to get a new high score, but even more interestingly, if you check the previous players, Polyhister's high score is actually FF06B5. By playing the game for hours on hours, players were then able to discover that there actually was a secret level you could access in the minigame by going through a convoluted and extensive list of steps, and after accessing this level and converting the symbols from the Witcher image, along with an entire host of other cryptographic and investigative steps, which I won't go into here in the interest of time, eventually it was discovered that the entire time, the Witcher symbols were actually a set of coordinates, a door peering into our final steps. If we go to the coordinates in Cyberpunk, they are in the middle of the desert with absolutely nothing of note nearby. That is except for one out-of-place mattress sitting on the ground. Standing on the mattress without moving or touching your controller or keyboard for over 30 minutes then results in by far the most insane thing this mystery's seen yet. Suddenly, V is hit by an especially intense relic malfunction, which causes them to pass out on the mattress, after which a black screen with a figure of Ouroboros appears. Symbols and text start to reveal themselves and move across the screen in an odd motion. And then, in a flash, a white and hazy portal is opened that reveals a sequence of seemingly random numbers, and then the real horror begins. In the dead of night, in the desert with no one around you in pitch blackness, an otherworldly cube of sorts appears right in front of you, with flashing lights and a strange and ominous hum as it darts around you. The text, "No future, trust no one, and turn back," are transmitted into V's vision as you can barely move, after which the sequence ends as soon as it starts. You awake for a brief moment to find a man standing over you, after which you pass out and again awake in the middle of the desert, this time with a pile of clothes next to you, as well as a whole host of equipment and laptop, which if you read through has detailed logging of someone who was investigating you during your entire ordeal. And well, as of right now, this is where the mystery ends, with in many ways more questions than answers, but finally definitive proof that something truly unbelievable and crazy is going on here, and also a mystery that will likely now carry on into every CD Projekt Red game in the foreseeable future. Could it be related to the monks we saw around the statue from the beginning? After all, there is a quest in game where a monk randomly disappears before your very eyes, and he looks very similar to the man we woke up to standing over us. And also, how is the world of The Witcher involved? Maybe the conjunction of the spheres, the most important event in the entire Witcher universe, which saw multiple dimensions colliding into one another, could mean that the world of Cyberpunk and The Witcher have become one, which we also know from seeing references to Ciri in both games. Or could it be that Mr. Blue Eyes, the mysterious man watching us throughout the entire time we play Cyberpunk, is actually behind this larger conspiracy? To me, it seems clear that this grand mystery is only getting started, and the strange cube and otherworldly things we have seen firsthand imply that either aliens or maybe hyper-intelligent artificial intelligence behind the black wall, a protective barrier for rogue AI in the net in Cyberpunk, are behind everything. And honestly, to me, this is such an amazing mystery that is not only fun to investigate, but also ties into the lore of Cyberpunk and The Witcher perfectly as well. In multiple videos I've done on both games now, I've talked about what I think would be the perfect sequel and story setup for the next Cyberpunk game, and a lot of that comes down to potentially getting to dive into the AI and megacorporation threats firsthand. And the mystery of FF06B5 is at least implying that it will play a big role in the future. And on top of this, there are so many other clues people are finding even right now, like a lot of hidden messages in those emails for Polyhister that have Buddhist implications, once again tying back to the monks at the statue, as well as the discovery that the cube's texture in the game files is a QR code, which leads to a paragraph of text warning us to stop before it's too late, lest we uncover things that should never be known. It's the perfect example of a game mystery done right, taking place over multiple years, including secrets in multiple big budget and beloved games, and requiring real-world intervention and analysis as well. I don't know if the mystery of FF06B5 will ever truly be solved or concluded, but I do know for now, it's one of the coolest gaming mysteries out there, and it surely has a bright future ahead of it.